The Los Angeles Sparks are getting ready to get their second home game of the season, even though it's been 2 weeks. We've got Dave Yapkowitz here, our Sparks beat writer at the Next, to break down everything in LA, what's going well and what's going wrong for the Sparks. This is the Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast. Let's go.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, hello, and welcome to the Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host for this afternoon, Alex Simon, taking a little bit of a pinch hit for our normal host, Howard Megdal, who only works, 105 hours a week, it seems like. Sometimes we can have somebody step in and give Howard just that little bit of a breather here. Joining me today from the Next, Dave Yapkowitz. Dave, thanks for taking some time to talk today. How are things going in bright and hopefully sunny Los Angeles?
It's going well. With the start of a new season here. Obviously I just wanted to mention, it's just a little bit tough right now to kind of focus on basketball a little bit, but here we are.
Yeah, it's certainly a thing that you can't not acknowledge, and I appreciate you for bringing that up, because we here at the Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast really do. If you are willing to take the time, go check out what Howard Megdal wrote at the 9 this morning, kind of talking about what it's like. He is a father of some young kids who are elementary school and middle school aged, and I'm not of that age or have any children of my own, but I can only imagine what it's like to go through that right now. And there's an element of you can't not acknowledge it, but sometimes you do want to just kind of make sure you have the distractions that you want to have. And I think for anybody that's feeling things, those feelings are perfectly valid. We completely understand. But if you're wanting to kind of think about something else and kind of get your mind away, I hope you don't mind, about 25 minutes or so on the Los Angeles Sparks that we're going to talk today to help you get through it, because life does go on, Dave. And I believe you're going to be actually going to a basketball game tonight in that regard.
I will be at the Sparks home game tonight against the Phoenix Mercury. We're a little ways into the season, but it's important to remember too that this is actually going to be only their second home game of the season so far. The first being against the Minnesota Lynx about a week or so ago.
And I think that's such a unique way to remember how this start to the season has happened for the Sparks. They're 2-5 so far. As we talk here on Wednesday, it's about 7.5, maybe 8 hours before the tip-off of tonight's game against the Mercury. And they've only played one home game, despite, we're almost to the end of the first 3 weeks of the WNBA season, and they've played one game in Los Angeles so far. So who knows how much of a home court advantage they truly have right now, but anything that just is creature comforts and kind of life on the road, like, it is difficult sometimes to be out on the road traveling, especially in this, kind of ongoing pandemic that we're in, that I can hope for the Sparks' sake that being at home does give them at least some comfort, even though it's really home for one day and then 2 more on the road. So they really aren't home for a while to have the homestand to make up for all these early road games.
Yeah, I think it's when we look at the team, we already knew coming into this season that there probably was going to be an adjustment period with all of the new faces that they added in the off season. It was definitely going to take a little bit of time, to get everybody acclimated to playing with each other. But the schedule certainly doesn't do any favors for them in getting that done. They mentioned this after the Minnesota game, that it's a little bit tough to kind of build up the consistency that they wanted to have while they're on the road, and not getting in as much practice time as they would have hoped. It's as the season goes on, maybe we'll start to see some of those issues kind of balance out a little bit. But yeah, it's definitely been a bit of a challenge for them to really get that, where to just get that start that they wanted to have, while they're kind of you're in a different city, it seems, almost, every other day.
And I mean, for them too, when you only play one home game and then hit the road again, the home game might as well be a road game at that point too. And they're
Right.
kind of experiencing that with both their last home game against Minnesota, where they came in from Connecticut, then immediately went to Seattle. And now they're coming in from Vegas, immediately turn around and they play in Indiana on Friday. So really, you don't have an extended period where you're going to be home. You even have a few off days, maybe until after this. It's, you don't want to look too far ahead, but they'll have a home game against the Wings next week, and then they won't play again until June 5th. Then they won't play again until June 11th. Then they won't play again until June 19th. So they're really going to hit this point where they've crunched 3 games into kind of they've crunched 10 total games, really 11 into the first 3.5 weeks. And then it's going to just clear out for them for a little bit. And we might get a chance to see the team kind of learn a little more, but these games count all the same. And I think that's something that we can't ignore, is the fact that after they started the season with a really nice, what probably would be considered upset win over the Sky in Chicago, they followed that up with a win over Indiana. It has not been the smoothest of sailings, even as they kept some of these games pretty competitive.
No, yeah, definitely. When you only have a certain amount of games within the season, every game does count, and there's in the WNBA, 12 teams. There's no game that's a gimme game. There's no every game's going to be a tough game, and it's with the schedule that they've had. I think we've seen some good things, as you mentioned, the first 2 wins of the season, but they've kind of followed that up with a 5-game losing streak, and I think there are some issues that we're starting to see a bit, that somehow they've got to address these issues, that these are things that, regardless of what the schedule looks like, regardless of whether they're at home or they're on the road or whatnot, these are things that look like they've been kind of consistent in each of these losses that they've had. So yeah, there's definitely some things there that they got to work on a little bit. That, like I said, regardless of the schedule, it's this is stuff that could hamper them throughout the year if not addressed.
And I will want to get into those things, kind of what you think those things are and what your takeaways are. Before we do that, first, I want to acknowledge that they haven't necessarily been able to be at their healthiest either. They've been missing their 2 rookies that they brought onto the roster. Ray Burrell's only played in 3 of their 7 games. Olivia Nelson-Ododa has only played in 2 games. They also haven't had Christy Tolliver for the entire season so far, and will continue to not have her for as long as the Dallas Mavericks continue to play in the Western Conference Finals. They, on Tuesday night, kept their season alive with a win over the Golden State Warriors. So Tolliver won't join the team at least for another couple of days at that. And that's a player who obviously they would love to rely on. But speaking of Tolliver and the NBA, if you are interested in NBA action, you should check out BetOnline. BetOnline.net has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline currently has got plenty of things on the Western Conference Finals, featuring the Christy Tolliver sort of led. She's not the head coach, but she's a coach. So she's leading the Dallas Mavericks into their attempted comeback against the Golden State Warriors. You could find odds for that, but you can also find odds for every single WNBA game on BetOnline. BetOnline, where the game starts. And so when you look at the Aces, and we thank BetOnline for sponsoring everything, when you look at the way that the Aces beat them on Monday night, shooting the absolute daylights out of the ball, I think they made 11 of the first 13 3-pointers, something absolutely absurd. Is that indicative, you think, of a problem in terms of how the Sparks defend everybody, or is that a problem more specific to the Aces? Because the Sparks are allowing teams to make almost 40% of their 3-pointers so far this year, which is not great defense, particularly when you're only making 28% of your 3-pointers.
No, yeah, and it's definitely a bit of a shift from what we've seen in past seasons, where the Sparks, despite last year, with all the injuries they had, in the pretty disappointing season, they were consistently one of the top defensive teams in the league. And, this season we've just seen a little bit of a shift in that. And they're not really defending at the level that they have in the past. And, maybe we can chalk that up a little bit to we're still trying to, figure out where all the pieces are supposed to fit. We're still trying to figure out, get everybody acclimated to one another. But yeah, that's definitely something that's been an issue there. And it's the consistency. Like in their the home loss to Minnesota, they showed flashes of being able to defend at that level for brief stretches, but they just couldn't seem to consistently bring that same defense. And so that's I think maybe that's a little bit of we got to get everybody used to one another to be able to bring that same defense at a consistent level rather than what we've seen, just little brief stretches here or there. And then it just was kind of non-existent against the Aces. They got down by 20, I think it was, after the first quarter. So yeah, that's definitely something that they've got to address there.
And look, the Aces might be the best team the WNBA has ever seen. I'm willing to make that declaration right now at this exact moment in time, and that can be on me, but obviously we'll see. But the Sparks are the worst three-point shooting team in the league and giving up the best three-point shooting team in the league of their opponents of any team. That seems like a recipe for a long-term disaster in my mind. And look, even when you look at it as a per-game basis, in their 7 games, the Sparks are giving up 10 three-pointers a game, and they're making only 4.7. So even if you just look at it as the 5 and 10, that's a 15-point difference in a nightly basis on the 3-point line if you round up. If you're only making 5 3-pointers and you're giving up 10, you got 15 points that you have to make up elsewhere. And that's, to me, where you can't, even if you're making more free throws than your opponent, even if you're making more 2-point shots than your opponent, the 3-point line, as you've said, they've defended it really well. They've had good perimeter guard play. But the roster shifts that they made this offseason, Erica Wheeler is a very good perimeter defender. By not keeping her around, you were harming your perimeter defense. And in particular, and this is kind of what I wanted to get with you, Dave, because the player you traded for to get in Kennedy Carter is only averaging 13 minutes a game. Dave, do you kind of have an explanation to make it make sense to me why you would give up all of these assets for a player, but at least so far through the season, Fisher isn't really playing her that much?
I think it's a little bit of a combination here of coach and player trying to get used to one another, feel each other out a little bit. Heading into this season, I wasn't quite sure as to how the starting lineup was going to shake out. I thought there was a possibility that she might have been a starter, but it seems that Fisher's been comfortable even in the preseason with bringing her off the bench. And so if she was going to come off the bench, I kind of envisioned her as a 6th player, type in the sense that maybe she can really help stabilize that second unit, bring that scoring burst that they needed. But yeah, her minutes have been a little bit down, and not maybe what you would expect for a player of her when you traded for a player of her caliber. I want to go back to the Minnesota game, from about a week ago, where she actually did come in and provide a pretty solid boost when the team really needed it. They kind of got off to a slow start. She comes into the game, she got a couple quick buckets, was in my opinion, was at least consistent on that end throughout the game. And it seemed like, they just kind of struggled to score, and she really would have helped that. But she kind of got yanked in the fourth quarter there. When, like I said, I thought she was having one of the players that was having a solid impact that they really needed to pull off that win. But, she, for whatever reason, wasn't given the opportunity to kind of close out the game there. And that may be, that I know, Fisher trusts his starters, he wanted to maybe go back to what he's comfortable with. But, sometimes, especially in this league, you got to go with maybe the combination that's really clicking at the time. But I think it's definitely something to kind of pay attention to throughout the season as to her role and her minutes and how that's gonna play out throughout this season, because like you said, they did give up a lot to get her, and
Yeah.
you would expect that somebody of that caliber you would be playing a pretty significant role on this team.
And look, she's maybe not the purest of point guards in the world, but obviously, even in the time she's playing, she's still averaging 2 turnovers per game, even with only averaging 13 minutes a game, which are fewer than the amount of assists she's getting per game, 1.7. You never want to have a turnover to assist ratio that skews more turnover than assists. But, to me, especially when you look at the fact that there's been 12 players who have played games for the Sparks so far this season. And out of all of them, even though some have only played a couple of games, she's 10th out of the 12 players in minutes played so far. And especially if we want to give some credence to the idea that there's a learning curve here, that she's kind of figuring out the Fisher system, the other 2 guards that they've brought in this offseason, who seemingly like Carter were going to have to learn everything on the fly, in both Lexi Brown and Jordan Canada, have both been playing a ton of minutes and kind of been getting the minutes over Carter, which they've earned them and deserved them, I would say, almost undoubtedly. However, when you look at asset allocation and kind of what you had to give up in order to get a player like Carter, it certainly is at least a little questionable from the outside to see that and go, well, what's going on here, right?
No, yeah, it definitely is, because as you said, both Lexi Brown and Jordan Canada have seemingly fit in, really well. Lexi Brown, especially, she was a player that I just want to mention her, briefly, that she was someone that wasn't guaranteed a spot coming into training camp. She was on a training camp contract, and she was seemingly battling, Taya Cooper and Arella Girantes for a roster spot, and she beat him out in camp, made the roster, and she's actually been, one of their most consistent, you mentioned it earlier, a team that's not making many threes this season. Lexi Brown is kind of seems like they're one consistent 3-point threat. Like she's really been that's where she's really come in a lot.
Can I just say you're drastically understating that, because of the fact that the Sparks as a team so far this season have made 33 3-pointers, and Lexi herself is responsible for making 13 of those 33. So she's almost got half of the team's production from 3-point range so far this season. In addition to, by the way, she's turned the ball over very limitedly. There's only been 5 turnovers in 7 games, and she's played in all 7 games and is averaging almost 30 minutes a game. She's been passing the ball pretty well. She has a couple of games with 5 assists. She had 4 in that game against Minnesota. She's not necessarily been scoring other than shooting those 3-pointers for the most part, though she's had a couple of games where she's attacked at the basket. But you would have to think she has found a way to fit into what they want to do on both ends of the floor. But the problem just becomes is that the best use of your resources that you've allocated? And to bring in a player like Kennedy, there's a part of me that looks at it and says, it might not be pretty, but right now it's not like what you're doing is pretty. And you kind of need to just put the players into the lineup that are going to be here for a while and just see if it works. Because right now, you're looking at missing on the playoffs again when you've traded your first round pick away again.
No, yeah, I definitely agree. I think there's just little room for error when you have, just a certain amount of games. And especially with this team, as we've mentioned before, they've really, this is a team that's gone all in. They had high expectations, no matter what anybody may have said, there were some pretty heavy expectations coming into this season. And yeah, at some point, you can't dig yourself into such a big hole early like this, and it's still early, but still, we
say it's still early, but after this, I mean, they're already past the 1/6 mark of the season here. You run out of games really quickly in the WNBA to catch up on. So I agree. They're building themselves quite the hole to have to dig out of. Before we continue, speaking of building, if you want to have a protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, you got to go to Built Bar. I mean, come on. It's unbelievable how tasty that Built Bars can be. And also, they're good for you, too. Go to BuiltBar.com and use the promo code LOCKED15. That's LOCKED15. And you'll get 15% off your next order. That's LOCKED15 at BuiltBar.com. Built Bar, tell them Howard's mom, Grandma Myrna, sent you. And I guess, Dave, before we kind of start wrapping up here, how much is Chrissy Tolliver's absence and prolonged absence hurting this team in your estimation?
I think it definitely hurts. This was a season where, last season, she had missed a decent amount of games with an injury. But when she did play, it was really noticeable how much they really kind of depended on her. She was a starter when she did play last season. And I felt like this season, she'd really help them as transitioning into a bench role and being that steady, that ball handler with the second unit. And I think, with both Lexi Brown and Jordan Canada in the starting lineup, maybe the second unit is kind of, missing that a little bit. You're kind of missing that ball handler, that playmaker coming off the bench. And that's really where she would help. And she's also been, a pretty decent 3-point shooter. And that's another area that she'd help in. So I think, yeah, they're definitely missing her. And, I'm not saying that when she comes back, that's going to be the switch, to kind of get
that's
things
not going to be the one thing that fixes everything.
Right. Yeah. But, she's definitely being missed out there. There's some key areas that she'd be able to contribute in if she was out there.
I will say, for all the ways in which this team would have been a question mark that we even discussed in earlier podcasts here, I do find it interesting. For the most part, I would say they're kind of their big players, their 4 and their 5 position. Their rotations worked out pretty solidly. Nneka's been pretty good to really good, I would argue. Liz has fit in pretty seamlessly to what they want to do and has been solid for them. I wouldn't say she's been superstar level like she's capable of, but she's been perfectly solid. Chiney's contributed good minutes. Obviously, they suspended Amanda Zawibi's contract, and we've seen some tweets from Amanda that maybe indicate that she didn't love that decision. But for the most part, if you would have asked me before the season, there's definitely questions on the guards versus the forward/center spot. I would have said, though, that the guards seemed a little more set in how we thought they were going to go than the forwards and the centers. And that has not been the case at all. It seems like the forward and center rotation, they have pretty down solid, and they're performing pretty well within that rotation.
Yeah, no, they've definitely been like Nneka has been playing great. She's playing at that all-star level. And yeah, it seems like her and Liz have been a really good fit together.
Liz, which was, by the way, a huge question coming into the season, was how were they going to fit together? And for the most part, it hasn't seemed like an issue.
No, yeah. The only thing that I've kind of noticed a little bit, that with the rotation there, maybe not, rotation, but just how they're being utilized is, I would like to see maybe Liz get a little bit more touches and shot attempts than she has in the post. When she has gotten those touches, she's been very effective. And from anywhere on the court too, she's shown off a nice jumper, her ability to score in the post. It just kind of seems like there's been some games where, her shots kind of fluctuate a little bit. And, sometimes that's how it goes. Sometimes it depends on, who's got it rolling at the moment, who's fitting in. But, when she was also another huge addition, a max caliber free agent, that they brought in. And maybe, you just would like to see her utilized just a little bit more. And to take advantage of her ability there. And again, that could be too something of we're still kind of trying to feel each other out, see where everybody is. But, like we mentioned, again, you kind of don't have much room for error in a season like in a WNBA season. So, that's the only thing I would say in terms of the front court there is, just maybe kind of seeing Liz get utilized just a little bit more.
I do have one more thing to add, though, in watching this team is that they are not rebounding as well as you would expect for a team with these post players. They're giving up the most offensive rebounds of any team in the league. This is a team with 2 Agumekes and Liz Cambage, but they've given up almost 10 offensive rebounds per game so far this season. They're 11th in the league in rebounds grabbed themselves. They're 11th in the league in rebounds allowed. They're allowing too many rebounds, not getting enough. For as much as this team maybe seems like they've got a good rotation, all of these players need to be crashing the glass a little bit more and helping clean up the rebounding.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, no, definitely. Like this, it seems like rebounding's been an issue, not just this season, but in consecutive seasons now. And, when we look at the front court, there's one player that I felt, was really going to help address that issue. And that was a healthy Shanae Ogumeke. And as we saw her in the opening night win against Chicago, she had several key offensive rebounds in that game. And unfortunately, the past couple of games, she hasn't played. She's been out with an injury that she kind of sustained during that Minnesota game. After the Minnesota game, it was just kind of like they kind of mentioned that Fisher kind of held her out the rest of the game as a little bit of a precaution. But she's missed kind of consecutive games in a row here. And, there's no question that a healthy Shanae is an impact player for this team, especially, in an area that they really need help in which is on the glass. So I just think, that's something that to monitor as the season goes on is her health, because she's mentioned multiple times that, her biggest thing is she just wants to be available for the team. With the injuries she suffered in past seasons, she just feels like, she hasn't really been available for them. And that's her main goal this year, was just being available. So, that's definitely something to watch as the season goes on. I did want to mention,
it's also worth watching tonight, by the way, because she's listed as questionable on the injury report for tonight's game against the Phoenix Mercury as we come to you on Wednesday, May 25th. She, by the way, to add to your point, in the 5 games she did play, she only averaged 17 and a half minutes per game but she was getting almost 5 rebounds per game. So she has been trying to do her part on the rebounding glass, and they would surely welcome her back. Do you have any last point before we sign off here on this Wednesday before tonight's big West Coast showdown?
Yeah, there's actually one more quick thing I wanted to mention, and it's kind of related to however long, Shanae may be out, whatever that injury may be, that there is one player that is available. She wasn't available to start the season. She was hurt, but she has been cleared to play. And that's Olivia Nelson-Ododa, one of the rookies who can kind of help, I think, in that area. So I just wanted to mention her a bit in that, maybe that's somebody that, Fisher can try and put out into the rotation, see what she can give them in the front court, because she's somebody I think that can help in that area.
Yeah, I mean, what Connecticut Huskies have ever done anything worthwhile on the WNBA stage? I can't think of one. Can you?
No, I don't know.
That program it's a mystery at what players do when they come here. Dave, thank you so much for taking the time. Enjoy the game tonight. And where can the people find you and your work?
You'll be able to find me at the Next, and you can find me on Twitter at Dave_Yapkowitz.
And I'm Alex Simon from Bay Area News Group, here to pinch hit for Howard. He needs a breather every so often. You can only throw so many pitches on your arm before it gives out. We're trying to never let it give out for Howard. So if I got to take a podcast or two here, that's no problem to me. You can find me at Alex Simon Sports. Thank you all for joining us on the Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast today on Wednesday, May 25th. We hope you come back tomorrow.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.